Welcome back. We're live in Ferguson. I want to show you live pictures from Los Angeles in MLK Boulevard in Crenshaw. Protesters on the streets, I should say. Dozens of police cars on the scene there as well. Again, we have seen protests in Boston, in New York, protesters which were just warned by police of unlawful assembly. Atlanta, obviously, as well. Back here in Ferguson, I want to introduce you to Pastor Lee, who's from the Flood Christian Church, which is Michael Brown Sr.'s, the church that he attends. Pastor Lee, appreciate you being with us. And I wish you were here under better circumstances, but your church last night was burned, was set ablaze.
Yes, sir. Last night I was on that end of West Florissant, and the police called me and said, hey, you need to get down here to the church. I said, for what? They said it's on fire. I said it can't be the case at all. Nothing is going on down on that end. Everything is going on down on this end. He said, no, get here. As soon as I hung up the phone with him, one of my members called me and said, hey, my friend stays right across the street, and they said that the church is on fire.
How bad is the damage?
From what I heard, it may be totaled.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Does it make any sense to you? I mean, what happened?
It makes no sense at all, man. I've been trying to fathom in my mind all day long. You know, I literally have just stopped crying, and even now as I'm talking to you, I'm tearing up about it, but it makes no sense at all. I feel like one of my children has died.
What do you tell people in the community? What do you, the pastors played such a role here over the summer in terms of trying to police the community and help stop violence in the protests. What's your message to people tonight?
My message is still the same. We still promote love, we still promote peace, and we're looking for justice to be served. We don't get justice by acting violently, but it's a due process, and so I still encourage the people in the communities to still remain peaceful, to still act in a spirit of love. And as for the Flood Christian Church, somebody asked me today, what are you going to do? I said, we're going to rebuild.
You are, no doubt about it.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
But
We've been knocked down, but we haven't been knocked out.
It's a hard thing. You got everything invested in this.
I have everything invested. I poured out everything that I had. I took from my children's savings account and to do this, to do the church, and to see it in flames last night. I couldn't do anything but cry. All today, it's just been a very emotional day. I feel like I've been hit with several different blows. The non-acquittal, the non-indictment, the way that we were told, to look at my members' face and see the brokenness on their face, then to come out into the community, see the community set on fire, then to get a call late last night that the church was on fire. It's been a strong testament of faith.
Yeah. Well, Pastor Lee, I appreciate you being with us, and I wish you the best for you and your congregation.
Thank you so much, man. I greatly appreciate it.
Appreciate it a lot. It is just about 8 p.m. here in Ferguson, and we've just had a number of incidents here. Protesters confronting authorities around the police headquarters. We saw 2 people being arrested. However, so far at least, no large-scale violence, certainly not what we saw last night. In that respect, a lot has changed in the 24 hours since the grand jury decision came down on the death of Michael Brown, and parts of Ferguson erupted in violence. Tonight, a massively bigger National Guard presence, 2,200 troops. That's up from 700 last night. Missouri's governor ordered them into action. They're out in force, including around the police department in Ferguson. Again, some have been confronting protesters. However, it seems different in tone and tenor than last night's outpouring of rage. There are protesters out in force around the country as well. Students in Boston marching on police headquarters and toward the city's Roxbury neighborhood. The marchers gathering around the local police station. Marches as well in Los Angeles, in New York, Atlanta. We have seen more than 100 locations in all, in Canada as well. I want to begin with Chris Cuomo, who's at police headquarters in Ferguson, which is where we saw so much of the violence begin last night. Chris, explain what you're seeing, what's happening there now.
Right now we're on the protester side of the street. South Florissant has been shut down where we are right now. Down one way, there are police cruisers about 3 blocks deep. Down the other side, they're just holding traffic because of what you're seeing now. Now, this was what we were supposed to see last night in terms of defensive setup by authorities. You have the National Guard there in the traditional-looking BDUs, the basic dress uniforms of the military. They're supposed to be protecting the structures. In front, you have the phalanx of officers. They've come out in more force to deal with the restriction of assembly not in the street. However, the street has now been shut down, and they have moved back. They're definitely giving some quarter to the protesters. People here are mostly young and angry. They're chanting, and obviously they're talking about what they see as a miscarriage of justice in the grand jury.
And Chris, that has been the site of protests really over the last 100 days or so, and it's usually been allowed to take place except when people actually get into the street and block the street. That's in the past when we've seen arrests being made.
And that's exactly what's happening right now, is that, the question is going to be how much do the authorities allow here outside the norm, which was to have business as usual with traffic moving. You're seeing a couple of cars get through here now, but they're basically coming from this area. It's not through traffic, but you have several hundred. The crowd is growing here, and they are upset, as you can see from the signs and things they have here. And you've heard a lot of this, Anderson. People are still obviously very angry.
All right. Chris Cuomo, appreciate it. We're going to continue to check in with you. As we said, we saw at least 2 arrests being made there just several minutes ago. And as I said, there are protests across the country, including in New York. Miguel Marquez has been with the protesters there. Miguel, last we saw you, protesters were on the FDR Drive, which is a major highway around the east side of Manhattan. Where are you now, and what's the scene? Because we saw police also warning protesters that they were assembling unlawfully.
We are farther up the FDR, and both lanes are shut down. Protesters have taken over both the south side lane and the northbound lane. We're probably somewhere around East 20th Street right now, headed up toward, we don't really know. Last night we walked all the way to Harlem, and there was a standoff with police when they tried to take a bridge. We know that there are several simultaneous protests going on across the city tonight. Part of the protesters plan to try to take back the streets and show authorities who is boss, essentially. This crowd that we're with growing inside. If you can see that light shining over us as we go, that's the police helicopter overhead that's been keeping track of this. Police, I will say, we're on an elevated part of the FDR right now. Police in large numbers are along the bottom. Here on the south side, you can see that police vehicles are gathered here. At certain points, police did form a barricade or a blockade and tried to slow the crowd down. It is not clear if this is going to come to some sort of confrontation, but at the moment, police are being respectful, giving them their distance, and allowing these protests to protest. Anderson?
Miguel, how was this organized? Is it something kind of organized over social media, or is it planned well in advance? And I assume, usually in New York, you have to have a permit for protests. I assume something like this, there's not a permit for. They just marched onto the FDR Drive. Is that right?
Yeah. Look, they saw what happened last night. The protesters took to the streets. They started going up against traffic. They marched all the way to Harlem. They tried to take several bridges last night. And I think that inspired a lot of groups here in the city. Then they then got together today. And clearly there was a coordinated effort for different groups to head off at different times into different parts of the city to try to take back those streets and to prove their point of who is in charge of society and what they want authorities to do. And also to just, frustrate the police in their ability to handle all of these protests. At the moment, the police are here in very big numbers, but they are not in riot gear. They are nearby, but not making their presence very well known. There are a few walking alongside us here on the elevated highway, but they are staying a very respectful distance back. This protest, clearly a spark in Ferguson, has just caused a fire here in New York. Anderson?
Miguel Marquez, thanks very much for that. Let's go next to Paul Verkaman at CNN. He's in Los Angeles. Paul, we're seeing what looks like a very different situation. There are a lot more police vehicles than what we've seen, at least in New York, where Miguel Marquez is. What's the scene where you're at?
Well, I'm right here at Flowers Street, right near USC, and there's a metro train track running through here. So police decided that they would make a stand here. And as the protesters try to go down this way, they sealed them off. So all of a sudden, this crowd of about 300 or 400 then went down the other way. And Chris, go ahead and pan over here. You can see that the protesters now moved back up Figueroa. I think it was a little bit of a surprise that the protesters went toward the train tracks. There was a little bit of a heated confrontation, just some shouting, some people surrounding a police car. But there were no punches thrown, and there was no pounding on the car or anything like that. has largely been a peaceful demonstration, with protesters chanting everything from hands up, don't shoot, and many of them expressing their support for Ferguson here in Los Angeles tonight. They've been hiking for quite some time, at least I would say 2.5 miles. And there, as I said, there's not been any violence that we have seen.
Lou, I want to bring in, as we look at these images from Los Angeles, I want to bring in retired Lieutenant General Russell Honore again. General Honore, I mean, as you see these pictures, it is interesting how a protest which began here in Ferguson, how we are now seeing protesting popping up in a number of cities across the United States. We saw a little bit last night. Certainly now it seems to be somewhat even larger, or at least more widespread. How difficult is it for law enforcement to deal with a situation like this? Because again, these are not permitted protests, which is usually what a city requires for protests like this. Police don't want to, I guess, be too aggressive. At the same time, they do want to maintain law and order.
Absolutely, Anderson. It take a lot of patience on the police part to understand that civil disobedience by itself is to force the police to take actions. So if the people stand in the street, and if it can be done in a safe way, sometimes it's best to observe that as long as it doesn't go violent. More often than not, many times the police will want to move them out of the street because I said so. And that is when the pushing and shoving start, and that's when they go violent, and that's when they put people in jail, or people actually do criminal acts like throw things at the police. You throw something at the police, you're going to go to jail. But I think police in the cities, unlike Ferguson and St. Louis that have mobilized the National Guard and backup troops, they're dealing this with shift officers who are going to probably be working overtime. They're going to have to change their game unless they can come to a political conclusion here that says, hey, we're going to do this in terms of a federal review of procedures across the country at the heart of this issue, or we're going to have a blue ribbon panel that's going to appoint it, that's got 90 days to make recommendations to the federal government as well as to every state on how we deal with these issues in the future. But I can tell you this, Anderson, if St. Louis can't control this, you know what the next step is, and it's called the Insurrection Act, the same thing they did out in Los Angeles. Now, we're nowhere near that now, but people might want to look at that because that is a statute that's designed if local authorities cannot control and provide civil law inside their cities. Over.
It's interesting, General, when we heard earlier today from the mayor of Ferguson, who himself came under a lot of criticism, of course, during the summer for saying there was no racial divide in the city. I think he's walked back those statements now. But he came out today and said he basically has no relationship with the governor of this state, and in fact hasn't talked to the governor of the state of Missouri since the last protests in the summer in terms of an organization of trying to affect change in the community here, which clearly needs to take place on some level. The fact that there's no communication between the mayor and the governor is kind of extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm surprised too, and when you go back and you look at the history of crisis in the country, that's the kind of a problem we had during Katrina, command and control between governor and the state. We had the same thing up in New Jersey with the governor of New Jersey and a mayor. We're going to have to relook at this, as I said, with a blue ribbon panel to determine what is broken in our governance that we can't handle simple operations. People like in the UK, the London police must be shaking their head in amazement at how we respond to simple civil disobedience in the United States.
Lieutenant General Russell Honore, I appreciate talking to you. We're going to continue to talk to you throughout this hour. Up next, Officer Wilson's attorneys speaking out for the first time tonight. I talked to two of them just before we went on air. We'll hear their perception of what is happening in the streets here, also their perception of the case that Officer Wilson made to the grand jury, and a whole lot more. My conversation with them ahead as protests continue to take place across the country. More on that tonight. Stay tuned.